Firefox Alternatives for people who don't like Mozilla, Nextcloud questions, Gnome versus KDE, and maybe we'll debate how you say Gnome, private home ownership, and private JMP chat alternatives. Welcome to the Surveillance Report Q&A 210, where we answer questions from our amazing supporters who allow us to make this podcast possible for all of you. This allows you to engage with us and also us to kind of give some of our time to also thank people who make this podcast possible. You can join the Q&A on Patreon at patreon.com/surveillancepod. Or if you just want to send Monero tips, we have xmrchat.com/surveillancepod. With that second one, you don't need any personal information. You just put any name and then send a Monero tip and you include your question. We didn't get any of those this week, so make sure to add some more if you want us to read them next week. So the first question is from Satellite, and they said, coming around for another orbit. Great content across all the channels lately, by the way. Keep it up. Thank you so much. And they have a two-parter. Basically, they say that they like Firefox, but they're not thrilled with Mozilla. Have you guys come across a similar browser that can be hardened like this, but retains the functionality of account synchronization, either through direct integration or an installable extension? Generally speaking, the two core browser options across operating systems are going to be Chromium and Firefox-based browsers, essentially. So your options to start on kind of that big bucket level or to choose whether you want to use a Chromium or a Firefox-based browser. Again, there's some others on specific operating systems, but those are kind of the big buckets. It seems like you like Firefox and you just don't like Mozilla. So in that case, I might push you to look into the Firefox-based bucket, but look for things that might not be part from that organization if you don't like them. So some of the browsers right now that I'm seeing a lot about, of course, people know I'm a big fan of Mullvad browser, but I think Mullvad is a little bit more pre-hardened and has a very specific use case that doesn't do what Firefox necessarily does. Similar story with Tor, which it has a very specific use case. It's not as broad as what Firefox is supposed to be. You also have things like LibreWolf that you can use instead. And of course, the new one, which I don't formally recommend yet because it's still pretty new and it's not like strictly a privacy and security browser, is Zen. Zen is Firefox based and it's meant to emulate Arc browser, which is very popular for its new browser functionality. So those are all just kind of loose options I could think of in my head that are Firefox based, should be very familiar to you. And Zen specifically is pretty cool because it still uses like Firefox Sync. So you could use Firefox on mobile and Zen on desktop, and you could still sync your bookmarks as you used to, essentially. So just something to try out. That's all I got for that first question.
The only concern I have with your answer, and I'm sure you know this for the record, is all of the things you just recommended are still Firefox-based. So with the exception of maybe like Tor and Mullvad, if Mozilla goes under one day and stops developing Firefox, they're all up a creek. And the reason I say the exception to those two companies is because they're the only ones, I think, that have the talent and the financial means to keep developing it and like bring it in-house. But they've also never said they would do that. So we didn't even know if they would. That's what kind of sucks is we pretty much only have those two options. And for the record, I know there's people out there that are going to say like Pale Moon, because apparently they don't use the same internet as the rest of us. I tried Pale Moon and it's atrocious. The UI is terrible. There's like no extension options whatsoever. 90% of the internet won't work on it. There's text-based browsers like that run in your terminal, which I would like to test out, but I'm still willing to say that they're probably not feasible for the average user.
There's WebKit as well.
That's true. I forgot about that. But is Safari even available on non-Apple devices?
No, but there are a couple WebKit-based browsers, because WebKit is open source. So there are a couple browsers, like niche browsers on Linux you can use that are WebKit-based, but they're not as robust as Firefox and Chromium-based browsers.
You say your issue is with Mozilla, which, I mean, y'all know, if you watch regularly, you know I've blasted them so hard. I'm 100% with you. But it's kind of one of those things where we don't really have any good choices. I remember there's another one that's up and coming, like Ladybug or something, but I think it's still super, super early in development. I haven't even seen anything with it. So yeah, I wouldn't consider that a formal recommendation, but it might be something worth looking into potentially. For the record, I'm looking at your fuller question here, and it sounds like Brave, to me, checks all your boxes. I mean, it is missing the same granular control that you get from like the about config of Firefox. I will give you that. But I mean, you know, it's got syncing, it's got great add-on extensions. I think it has useful features. You didn't really specify what those were, but I like Brave's features. It's not owned by a data-motivated company. I know that's a controversial take, but let's be honest. Let's be grown-ups here, okay? We're talking about browsers. I know for some reason there's like this fanatical religious level of devotion to browsers and browser companies. And like right now, all the pro Mozilla people are like foaming at the mouth that I just recommended Brave, and vice versa, I'm sure. So Just try to put that aside for 10 minutes. And as far as we know, Brave is not the Antichrist, especially compared to like Google or somebody. But yeah, those are kind of our only two options. Either you get a Firefox fork of some kind or Brave. I think those are really the only two feasible options here, to be honest.
We're going to address this super quickly because neither of us have any commentary on this. We don't have experience with it, so it's hard for us to say anything about it. But Satellite also said that sometimes they open Firefox and their extensions just disappear, especially uBlock and Sponsor Block. So they're asking if we've ever experienced that. I can't say I have. Nate hasn't either. So if anyone in the community has, definitely leave your comments and share your experiences. And then maybe if enough people say they are, then there's enough to look into.
David Johnson is hitting up with a couple of different kind of related questions. The first one is, do you think your own hardware or a VPS is a better choice for Nextcloud? As the resident Nextcloud hoster here, I guess I'll say I would prefer your own hardware whenever possible, but that's not always feasible. Like for a long time, I've been hosting things out of a data center because I live in Texas and our grid collapses at the drop of a hat. So if I were to host anything out of my home, it wouldn't be accessible. There's also bandwidth concerns. Ideally, your own hardware is the best because Nextcloud cannot be end-to-end encrypted or zero knowledge. So if you want the maximum level of privacy and safety from outside threats, then inside your home is going to be the best. But I think there are times when a VPS makes sense. I mean, mainly if you have a low threat model and you just you want something that's a little bit more control of your data as opposed to using like the Proton suite or something like that.
There's always just kind of a risk when you host things on your own, and I think it really depends on the use case. If you're having Nextcloud set up for, an organization with 5, 10 plus people, unless you have like a dedicated server room that you can guarantee uptime, a VPS might guarantee uptime a little bit better, but it's really hard to guarantee, like Nate said, the privacy of something like Nextcloud with the VPS because you don't do the encryption necessarily before it leaves your device. So there's a lot of trust in the VPS provider there.
You did remind me of one thing I'll go ahead and say is with the VPS, you never really have to worry about like device maintenance. If you're hosting it at home, you have to think about what if my device fails? Do I have backups? Which you should be keeping backups anyways, even on a VPS. But do I have the money to get another server in a timely fashion if this one crashes? How beefy of a server do I need, et cetera, et cetera?
There's a lot of hidden costs too. I mean, the NAS, I finally got a UPS and those things are pricey. And the hardware, the NAS itself costs money.
Even a crappy UPS is like $150.
Yeah, the energy bill costs money. Hard drives cost money. So a VPS has a more consistent recurring cost that you can put a number on, which is also useful.
The next question is, do you think GNOME or KDE is a better desktop environment in terms of privacy and security? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a clue. I would say this is probably something I would go check the Linux Experiments channel and see if he's tackled this issue, because I know he talks about this kind of stuff all the time, and I'm sure it's come up once or twice in one of his videos.
If someone has more insight for us to look into, I'd really appreciate it. It's not really a question I've thought of. My guess is it doesn't matter that much because it's the desktop environment, and I'm guessing they have similar permission access and the risks are similar, and I doubt that either of the teams makes a drastically different decision that could impact security, but that's my guess. So I could be completely wrong. So if anyone has more insight, definitely point us in the right direction. We don't know everything.
Okay, hold on. I've been making use of this Jan AI tool that everybody's been talking about lately. According to Jan AI, and I'm running the Llama model, so take it with a grain of salt, by default, GNOME is more secure because it has more restrictive default configurations compared to KDE, which reduces the attack surface. It's also design principles prioritize user data protection, encryption, and secure authentication mechanisms. And it also has built-in features like file system encryption, secure boot, and support for encrypted storage devices. KDE, on the other hand, focuses more on customization, community-driven development, and but it says they had it. I hate the way this thing words stuff sometimes. Built-in features for KDE, encryption support, secure boot, and support for encrypted storage devices. So
I was going to say, most of that didn't sound like exclusive to GNOME as far as I know.
KDE community is active in contributing features and patches for improved security. KDE's potential vulnerabilities, more complex configuration, third-party plugin vulnerability. So I didn't know that. You can do third-party plugins in KDE. GNOME's advantages, default security settings, and built-in security features. So it sounds like, assuming this is to be trusted, which again, take it with a grain of salt because it's AI, but it sounds like GNOME has more like better default settings compared to KDE, but I don't know how well that holds up in comparison in practice. All right, and then the last question, you said, do you think an on-device VPN or a proxy network like SPN is a better way to achieve internet connection privacy? I'm assuming you're talking about comparing them. You say that, what do we think about Safing's argument that VPNs were never meant to be a privacy tool? And what do we think about Simplified Privacy's argument that many websites may be hosted in the same data center as your VPN provider, which could significantly lower how much privacy your VPN provides? And have you used the proxy-based VPN from Simplified Privacy? No, I've never used their VPN. I also don't understand that argument because from what I understand, okay, VPNs do two things. They encrypt your traffic between your device and the VPN server, and they change your IP address. And then if you enable it, it can also do some DNS block listing to help with known malicious sites and known trackers, which is an important caveat, known ones for the record. And I'll touch on your first question in a second. I think that's part of the privacy protection they claim to offer is if 1,000 people are using the same VPN server, that means they're all coming from the same IP address. So who cares if the website you're visiting is located physically in the server rack next door to your VPN? That's still 1,000 people coming from there. Like, I don't understand how that's any different than it being located in Germany or, Canada or Utah or anywhere in the world. Like, I don't understand what that has to do with anything. But I haven't read this blog post, so maybe it would make more sense if I read it. Although the fact that they sell a VPN sounds like kind of weird to me. I digress. As far as Safing's argument that VPNs were never meant to be used as a privacy tool, I think they make a really good argument. For those of you who don't know, basically their argument is VPNs were originally created in the early days of the internet, back before everything was encrypted, as a way for employees to connect to a network when they're offsite, when they're maybe traveling or working from home. They can connect to the corporate network and they can securely access everything they need and still do their work. And that's really what they were originally designed for. And then the privacy community was like, oh, we could use these for other things too. I really like SPN, actually. It's super user-friendly, and I think they really are taking a lot of innovative approaches to fix some of the shortfalls with VPNs. As far as the front-end facing thing goes, I don't think they're really doing anything different, to be honest. It's still encrypting your traffic and it's still changing your IP address, but I appreciate that they're like breaking up the traffic through different tunnels for different apps. I appreciate that they're trying to have a little bit of a decentralized pattern, a little bit of an onion routing thing. So they've got a lot going on there that I think is really good for privacy. It is a great product, and I really believe in it. Although I will be honest, I think, especially with the release of data from Mullvad, I really think that VPNs, especially if more of them start to adopt that kind of stuff, I think they're really closing the gap between the two. The more advanced things like splitting up your traffic through different tunnels and multi-hop and data, which for those who don't know is Mullvad's new defense against AI traffic analysis. They add a bunch of noise and random packets to your data, so it's harder to do time-based correlation attacks or whatever. They're just kind of taking different ways to approach that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I interviewed the Safing team themselves on the Techlore side of things.
Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons did too.
Yeah, and I very directly asked them, where are VPNs good? Where are they bad? They actually have a conflict of interest, and I still think we're extremely transparent about where VPNs are good and bad. And they also kind of disclosed where they think the SPN is better. And the way I understand it, and even the way they seem to communicate it, is it's kind of a nice in-between. It's not quite as robust as Tor, but it's much faster than Tor, and it still offers quite a bit more protection than a VPN. And I've never heard of the simplified privacy. I just looked into it.
I've heard of the website, but I haven't heard this argument.
I haven't heard of the site. I've just been, while you were talking, I was going through kind of the blogs, and it's pretty polarizing stuff, I'd say. They're extremely anti-Mullvad. They're very anti-Mullvad browser. They pretty much have their own alternative to Mullvad browser, which they claim is better because it emulates an entire operating system instead of just falsifying data through a browser. I haven't thoroughly dug through their arguments on my end, but I'll just say that a lot of what they're sharing isn't quite what's recommended as best practice from currently accepted experts in the community. Next question is from number 6. Hey guys, curious what your thoughts are on private home ownership. The extreme privacy method seems like it'll be difficult, if not impossible, for most people. Is online data removal a good enough solution for most threat models? It won't deter anyone who's looking through property records, but should make it harder to find your address. Yeah, and I hate to do this. I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just it's really complicated, and it's not something that we can cover without making this a 20-minute answer. I interviewed Jonathan Steele, who is a lawyer. And then right after that, interviewed the guy behind PrivacyPost.io that offers a service that's meant to pretty much allow you to try to do some of this private address stuff. So those are really where I'd point to two people, because I asked pretty much all the questions you could possibly have about it, what your options are, how to actually do it. And those are from experts. Those are from people who both run services to accomplish this or are lawyers. So I'd push you to those. But yes, I think it's good to also recommend and look at the less extreme options, which are having private mailboxes, using those first, trying to keep your address off as many places as possible. Using data removal services is a big step in the right direction too, to just make it harder to get the data, but it won't actually hide the data. And the other big thing is that, especially if you're buying property, you must do all your prep before you buy it. You can't just buy a property and put it in a trust, because there's still a public record of what happens before you put it in a trust.
Extreme privacy is called extreme privacy for a reason. And even Michael Basil says that. And I think it's a really good resource just to kind of know what the options are out there and to be aware of some of the different threats. Like I do really like the book. You said most threat models, so I do want to caveat that obviously everybody's got their own threat model. For some people, yes, they really do need to go through that route. I think for a lot of people though, and like Henry was saying, like the thing is, when it comes to these major things like starting your own business or buying a home, it's really complicated. And for most people to do it right, and that's the thing, is like you screw up, and Michael Basil has said this before, you screw up once and something gets through the cracks. So for most people to do this right, they're going to have to go to a lawyer, which definitely check out those interviews. I've heard those. They're really good. Go talk to a lawyer, figure out what your options are, read Extreme Privacy. He has some advice on it. But I think for most people, yeah, it's honestly, for the average threat model, it's way more work than it's worth. And it's way more expensive than it's worth too. That's the other thing. To directly answer your question, yeah, I think data removal services are a good idea regardless. I can attest, LexisNexis thinks I live at my P.O. box. And I don't know if they have my actual address on record, but like somebody has helped me like hook into their API and look myself up, and it definitely returned my P.O. box. And I'm like, oh, well, that's good. I'm disappointed that I'm in there, but at least they've got the wrong address. So yeah, what Henry was saying about like P.O. boxes, when you're buying something online, put in the billing address, use privacy.com, put in the billing address as like a local hotel, trying to opt out of junk mail, trying to freeze your credit, like all that kind of stuff that we recommend and that Michael Basil also recommends, like that'll really go a long way. And at that point, it's going to take somebody really dedicated doing some really hard searching to find you. And again, for an average threat model, I really want to stress that for the average person who's not like super politically activist, not a journalist, not a high value target of some kind, I think that probably will work. But it all depends on what you're trying to protect from. So all right, and then our last really quick question from Khalid Duel. You said alternatives to JMP chat with multiple numbers and unlimited talk time. The best thing I can point you to is on the New Oil's website. It's under least important. We have a voice over IP section, and I list pretty much every service I found that lets you buy a phone number that you can use as a phone number. Because, there's a lot of like, you can make Signal calls, you can make WhatsApp calls, but there's some, like I think Skype is listed there. Technically, you can use Skype to dial other normal phone numbers. And I think get text messages as well. Same thing with, Viber? Viber's a really popular messenger in Asia, apparently. And same thing, they let you buy phone numbers. So it's all the ones I found. If you guys know any more, please check the requirements and go ahead and open an issue on GitHub. But I don't know. I haven't tested all of them personally, but I would start by looking into those and see what you can find.
And we didn't have XMR chat questions this week, so we'd love to see more of those. All of you Monero peeps, rise up. I'm wearing a Monero shirt today, so we're still trying to promote Monero over here, but we want some more questions. And with that said, again, just to recap, we covered Firefox Alternatives for people who don't like Mozilla. There were some Nextcloud questions, Gnome versus KDE. Please leave some more analysis for us to look into. We'd love to learn more. Private home ownership and private JMP chat alternatives. Thanks for tuning in and asking your questions. We couldn't really make this content without the questions, so we really appreciate you all, and we appreciate your support for the podcast. If you're not already on Patreon, you can join us and join the Q&A at patreon.com/surveillancepod, or again at xmrchat.com/surveillancepod. See you next time.